Hi everyone, I'm Haris Papayvagelu. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Information Law, University of Amsterdam, and I have to say that I'm super impressed and super glad that you're all here today. I'm very glad to welcome you all to our first of all to my hometown and to our craft session on the hidden costs of digital sovereignty, Greece's data infrastructures as a site of political contestation. And first, I'd like to introduce my fellow co-organizers of this craft session. So first of all, Dr. Plixavra Vaggiatzoglu, a postdoctoral researcher at the Amsterdam Center for International Law. Dr. Lawrence Nodes, also a postdoc at the University of Amsterdam at the AI Media and Democracy Lab. Dr. Theodora Kotsaka, our local experts here, who is a coordinator of the Commons Observatory here at the Institute for Alternative Policies. So thanks, Dora or Theodora, for helping us with facilitation. And thank you to Enna for hosting this out-of-fact craft session. Christos Vretos from Electra Energy Cooperative, a social cooperative active in the energy sector. And last, Lydia Emanuelidou, a journalist at Solomon, a non-profit news media organization here in Greece. We'll first begin with short opening statements or remarks, 5 minutes approximately each, and then move into a round of questions and dialogue among the panelists, and then finally we'll open it up to you all for questions and discussion. So I'll begin by saying that data centers, which is at the core of this panel and this craft session, are material infrastructures for storing, hosting, and processing data, including the computationally intensive tasks of training and running generative AI models that are slowly but unfortunately sorely infiltrating so many vectors of our lives. They are materially intensive, requiring land, energy, of course labor, and come with a range of costs, many of which remain strategically and deliberately hidden. In short, they can be considered as a de facto extractive form of infrastructures with minimal benefits to local communities, at least in the current industrial paradigm. These are, of course, also currently used in the military-industrial supply chains that are fueling the tech-enabled genocide in Gaza. The reason why we're gathered here is a recent explosion of investments in data centers in Greece, specifically. But to understand why these investments are happening now and why it is important then to consider them, we also must take into account and understand the local political economic context, so the reality of Greece. Since the 2010 debt crisis and the imposition of economic adjustment programs, as they call them, by the Troika, that is the Eurogroup, the European Central Bank, and the IMF, Greece has undergone one of the most violent economic restructurings in post-war Europe. The social devastation that this crisis caused is still felt to this day and is relatively well known. But what is less known, though, and less discussed, is how this reshaped the role of the state, namely by accelerating a wave of unprecedented privatizations, the commodification and liquefaction of land and public assets, and the outsourcing of core infrastructures and services to foreign capital. Prototypical neoliberalism. In 2013, the state or the government back then created the Enterprise Greece agency and adopted a strategic investments framework to attract primarily foreign direct investments, as it urgently needed the cash to keep afloat, deploying thus what international political economists would characterize as state capitalist strategies. For the sake of reference, strategic investments in this context refer to any investment that exceeds certain thresholds or that meets certain thresholds, including exceeding 75 million euro of investment or more. And if they do so, they may benefit from a series of facilitations, including tax breaks, expedited administrative clearances, and so on and so forth. More recently, in 2020 and 2021, the current government reformed zoning laws to allow land that was previously designated for agricultural use to be repurposed often for industrial or other use, including the development and construction of data centers. It was in this context then that Microsoft in 2020 announced its project called GR for Growth, rather poor wordplay, which was actually designated, of course, as a strategic investment because it almost reached 1 billion euro. The investment, among others, concerns the construction of 3 data centers in the broader region of Attica, so near the airport, the upskilling of 100,000 private and public sector employees, including primary school students, in Microsoft products and services, as well as some other facilitations or investments. And before concluding this brief introductory statement, I would like to highlight 3 key points that we identified from our recently published study with my colleague Evgenia Siapera from University College Dublin on specifically this topic. First, we were struck by how this investment was framed by the Greek state, but also mainstream media. So Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis himself presented it as a leap and a catalyst for Greece to enter the 21st century, effectively framing Greece as a digital laggard in need of Microsoft to achieve progress, competitiveness, and modernization. Second, we identified that most promises of the state and Microsoft regarding job creation, which is a staple promise accompanying these investments, were artificially inflated, while any implications for the strain of the data centers on an already degraded and old energy and water grid were sidelined, including proposals for more sustainable solutions. And finally, what became clear from our study and this story is the role of the Greek state, which has been instrumental in facilitating these investments in the hopes of both signaling, to the global markets that Greece is open for that kind of business, right, and a very welcoming environment, while integrating the country into digital capitalism global value chains instead of investing in domestic, more local-oriented productive forces. With that, I will conclude here. Thank you so much, and I will pass it on to Alexandra.
Great. So I will be focusing on the digital sovereignty part of the title and this graph discussion. What does it mean? So digital sovereignty is a very broad term that we hear a lot or more and more. It is generally used to convey a variety of policy goals in relation to technology development and use. It's about regaining the urgency to regain control over data, infrastructures, and technologies. It's about being strategically autonomous and forming partnerships with geopolitical allies. And it's about the reduction of material dependencies like physical resources and immaterial dependencies like digital connection. The European Union uses this concept to refer to the ability to act independently in the digital world and as a crucial means to safeguard our values. To do so, the EU, first, pushes for the investment in technologies it considers critical, like artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and cloud computing. Second, it pursues partnerships with so-considered like-minded countries like Japan, while blocking those deemed threatening like China. And third, it wishes to promote EU values and regulations as the global norm. So, for example, the plan to build an AI factory in Greece is meant to enhance European digital sovereignty. But what could be potential problems in general and for Greece in particular? Well, as the title of this craft implies, there are hidden costs underlying this digital sovereignty ambition. The term is used to represent ideal aims, such as autonomy and independence, that everybody would support. However, it is so vague and broad, and it is purposefully left undefined in order to bring together a lot of different interests that vary from national security, economic security, technological competitiveness, and societal well-being. Most importantly, achieving digital sovereignty is most likely unrealistic, given all the material, infrastructural, and geopolitical dependencies. Instead, what we see in research is that digital sovereignty is used to legitimize other objectives and policy measures that do not necessarily contribute to those ideals of autonomy and independence. Essentially, digital sovereignty, A, promotes techno-solutionism, and B, reinforces only a few select countries and companies within the EU. And what do I mean by that? A, digital sovereignty is presented, and as also Harris mentioned, with the media discourse in Greece, as a prerogative of the culturally and technologically advanced. It equates social progress and well-being with innovation and technological competitiveness. Although promoted as a collective goal, it is very questionable if this techno-solutionism is in fact a collective societal aspiration, one that is not only feasible, but also desirable in light of the costs and benefits that this pursuit entails. Focusing on innovation and future technologies risks neglecting the everyday needs of European society, which may be about simpler, lower scale, immediately available solutions to problems such as healthcare, housing, employment. Vague claims about the future benefits of critical technologies are often insufficient to address these concerns. And moving to the second part, B, the innovation costs and benefits are very likely to be borne and enjoyed unevenly within the European Union, with broader distributive, environmental and societal costs and shifts that we will also be hearing from the rest of the panel. The digital sovereignty agenda pushes, as I mentioned, for investment in technology and infrastructure. Member states that can afford to play a part in this EU digital sovereignty agenda in the long run and invest in domestic companies are the biggest ones, like Germany and France, that already have competitive tech market capacities. This means that likely only a handful of European companies can receive substantial financial support from their own countries and further attract most European funds, while companies from smaller countries like Greece will eventually be unable to compete. This further deepens the existing dependencies of Greece and further opens the door to big tech, like Microsoft, in obvious conflict with the EU's supposed efforts to reduce dependencies. And as a final point to potentially think about or further discuss later, while references to digital sovereignty do remain the same in the European policy discourse, we are now witnessing another shift in what it means and how it is used. We are moving from that rhetoric of the EU as a global norm setter, whatever that is, to a focus on deregulation and simplification of legislation in light of the recent tensions with the US. And additionally, the currently reinforced militarization dynamics will further shape the goals that remain hidden in this broad concept of digital sovereignty. So against that background, I would like to further explore how to resist this talk about digital sovereignty and innovation, and instead think about descaling, embracing our dependencies, and engaging respectfully with each other and everyone impacted by the discussion. And I think that is a good way to pass.
Thank you, Plitsavra. So what I like to do in my presentation is threefold. First of all, I want to highlight why the discussion that we're having on data centers is one of democratic importance that requires inclusivity. Second, to list some conditions under which the debate can be considered truly inclusive. But finally, highlight, in the spirit of this conversation, some hidden narratives, some already touched upon by my colleagues, that render an inclusive discussion currently more difficult. So first, why is the discussion we are having today one of democratic importance? And let's begin with a simple premise that I hope is not too controversial. And that is that decisions and policies that significantly impact people's enjoyment of fundamental rights are legitimate only if all those affected are also included in the decision-making process. Now, this premise reflects the ideal of an inclusive democracy. And this ideal of inclusivity is currently also positioned as a key virtue of global AI policies. Think of the AI Summit's Declaration on Inclusive AI, also signed by Greece, where inclusivity is hailed as leading, among others, the direction of future AI development. Now, why then should the discussion on data centers be inclusive? Well, first of all, data centers have an external impact on the people living around them. Think of environmental issues, pollution, noise, etc. And second, Data centers themselves as infrastructures sustain and power a whole range of downstream applications, algorithms that mediate our societies. Technologies that are also discussed within the FACT community: automated welfare systems, credit scoring, hiring algorithms, social media recommenders, systems that affect people's political, social, and economic resources. So we need an inclusive debate on data centers, but what would this mean in practice? And we can think of three more conditions to kind of get us towards this debate. First of all, we need political equality. And that is that people or their representatives through civil society should also have a right and effective opportunity to express their interests and concerns. Now, this is an ideal principle. What does this mean in practice? Well, this only makes sense if you have other actors, such as corporate companies or public institutions, that are willing to listen to citizens in a manner that also allows citizens to effectuate change. That means also listening to messages that are communicated in a fashion that would be considered more disorderly, like a strike or a protest, and that you reduce barriers that are an obstacle for political participation, such as the underfunding faced by civil society and digital rights organizations. And in this context, we can think of civil society as an important counterpower to state actors and capitalist or market-driven interests. And third, that there should be somewhat measures of public accountability, that we know what the trade-offs are, who risks winning, who risks losing in a particular situation, so that there's sufficient information available out there, that it broadens the knowledge base upon which others can act, and also importantly can contest decision-making or decisions. Now, do current debates live up to the standard of inclusivity? Hardly. And I'll highlight three narratives that have remained hidden within the debate, sometimes purposefully, that actually kind of make this free and inclusive debate rather impossible. First, citizen resistance might be hidden. People, due to lack of information, might be unaware of the changes that could be introduced by infrastructures, or worse, their protests can be made invisible. Looking at an example outside of Greece, we see the EU's plans to introduce and create lithium mines in Serbia. These mines have been met with rightful protest by the citizens there. Now, the EU has positioned these mines as necessary to realize their green transition, and also to free themselves from China's dominance over raw materials. So despite protest, the EU ignores local resistance, which also clashes with its own proclaimed position of being a value-driven and human-centric supranational entity. So it shows to some degree hypocrisy, but it has a downstream effect on this discussion, because if the EU's own legitimacy over these type of decisions is undermined by itself, how then can it critique other member states, such as Greece, when it makes decisions that might undermine the EU's digital sovereignty? Second, the role and impact of infrastructures themselves often remains hidden. Many initiatives on how to democratize AI or include multi-stakeholder governance think or are held over the algorithms and the decisions fueled by AI. Think of recommender systems on Facebook and how to make social media platforms more democratic. But perhaps those discussions can only be fruitful if we also democratize the space and the infrastructures on which these technologies run, so the infrastructures. And finally, before heading the discussion to Theodora, on a global level, and which was also mentioned by Karis, costs remain hidden. So you have discussions surrounding these initiatives where there's a promise of investment to close the digital divide by boosting economic growth. So economic growth is a carrot on the stick, but in practice those promises often remain unfulfilled, while instead they create dependencies on corporate players, other global superpowers, introducing gaps in new ways. And I will conclude my intervention there. Give the floor to Theodora.
Hello, I do welcome you on behalf of ENA Institute, and I will focus on subsea cables in the Mediterranean, especially the Greek part at the East Mediterranean. Can we have the... Actually, I would like to have the first map. Okay, here you can see that the Mediterranean, if we can zoom a bit, you can see that there is a certain concentrations in different parts of the world. Certainly near Suez, which means through Mediterranean, there is one amongst the three biggest concentrations in the world. Okay, so before starting, I would like to mention what do we mean when we refer to infrastructures of the Internet. In addition to data center, the Internet consists of vast infrastructures that include underwater, underground and above ground cables, optical fibers, satellites and air ground stations, cable signal boosters and a host of others. A cable network is an assemblage of many technologies, including the cable themselves, the ships that lay them, the image before it was on one of these kind of ships, and the submerged repeaters that boost signals on the ocean floor. It's the previous image was one of these kind of ships. The above are fields of conflict between public and private interests and have a strong material footprint given the volume of resources they consume. So now to move to my main points. As we have several new applications competing each other, digital applications, and they become more and more data hungry, the importance of keeping traffic closer to home and improving affordability for end users will only continue to grow. Greece, due to its geographical location, plays the role of an alternative route for Eastern Europe. It is the shortest route to the interconnections with the markets of the Middle East and Asia, as well as Africa. The underwater fabric optic cables in the Greek area pass through Piraeus and Chania and cross for kilometers the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, joining the network of Greece with that of Israel, Cyprus, Turkey and Italy. Can we go to the third map? Okay. Can we go to the part of Greece? Okay, because we are so east, we cannot be, the full of it cannot be in the map. So you see these lines that go through Chania and goes to Crete and Piraeus. So the Mediterranean enables global connectivity due to the prime geographic position that occupies between developed markets and new emerging markets and support the digital economies of three different continents. Up to now, this role was played by Marseille. It has historically been the busiest subsea cable destination in Southern Europe. Operators of the latest cable systems now are seeking diversity of landing sites along the North Mediterranean coastline for many reasons. That includes improved resiliency in the event of geopolitical conflicts, as it happens during these days, of international incidents, and of course it has to do with latency. At the same time, there is a growing strategic significance of the seabed, since the primary instruments of the cyber warfare threat to undersea cables are sabotage. The goal could be financial harm on companies, cyber attack, or interference with vital intelligence network. It's the Mediterranean Sea that is so important due to because it is a vital target for potential conflicting parts, and it is a key node in the global communication network. Can we see the next map? Okay, you see what happens there. I mean, now we're discussing about Hormuz and the Suez and the importance they have, but you see that there is also another importance due to all these cable networks that exist there. So we can imagine a future where subsea cable systems dedicated to data transmission and green energy supply to data centers will continuously transform the Mediterranean bed sea. High voltage, there are two types of cables. There are the high voltage power cables that transmit energy, and there are also the telecommunication cables that are not so harmful for the environment. So we have these high voltage power cables connected to offshore wind farms that are part of that system. Though necessary for worldwide energy supply, the installation and operation of these global communication infrastructures has sparked many concerns about the potential environmental impact, the economic issues arising from complex fisheries management. There is an issue there, especially for Mediterranean and Greek fishery, and the need for sustainable policies and regulatory changes to prevent a cyber war on seabed. They are usually buried beneath the ground, because they have they carry large currents of concentrated electricity, but that type of construction concerning the Mediterranean affect on each way possible Posidonian oceanic meadow. Their placement can disturb the marine ecosystem by generating electromagnetic fields. The cost of now we go to the cost of who is building this infrastructure. The cost of a single cable in the submarine cable sector can reach hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the route, complexity, and length. The private owner model, up to now, were a single IT corporation that owns and operates the cable for its own purposes. Now it has recently become more prevalent, although the consortium between telecommunications, large technology business, and infrastructure specialized companies. This is still in the game. Now, the big players collectively, they are holding more than 66% of the submarine cable network's capacity. Submarine cable routes are being redesigned by the companies in order to connect their data centers, in order to scale up digital production and storage. Okay, I have to make a concluding point, and I conclude saying that Google and Microsoft are increasingly major investors in new campus, and even though the seabed is considered as a common inheritance of humanity, at the end we have the big tech companies that are building the future under the sea veil. And there is no regulation. We need to regulate this and stop it being an El Dorado.
We'll have plenty of time then for the discussion afterwards, but then let's pass it off to our next local expert, Christos. Go ahead, have the floor.
Thanks a lot. I will try to respond to some of the interventions as well, because you generated a lot of thoughts. I was just with a very good friend that came back from the march to Gaza. I don't know how many people are aware of that, show of hands, because it didn't play out in the mainstream media at all. And basically, the Greek delegation, as many other delegations as well, were immediately arrested, deported, beaten by the Egyptian authorities. I mean, Egypt is a dictatorship, as you know, and much like other dictatorships, including Israel, it's employing AI for digital surveillance, including in airports. So I think already, kind of the militarization aspect of that, all of you, I think, more or less brought up. I think we're seeing it really, I'm not even going to talk about Gaza, like, there's no need. And I think it's interesting to reflect, because you talked about the militarization, and we know the recently announced Rearm Europe program, the 800 billion euro program announced at the Commission level, the European Commission level, and the NATO's new 5% of GDP target for defense spending. I think what's interesting there is that within this 5% of GDP by 2034, they said that 1.5% of that defense spending can be used in dual-use infrastructure. So it doesn't have to be missiles, it can be bridges or roads or also AI. So we're going to see a lot more military spending in the form of AI in all European countries, in all NATO countries. So I think it's good to just reflect on all of that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I am working for, indeed, a cooperative. It's a social cooperative called Electra Energy. We support the creation of energy communities. Energy communities are cooperatives that bring together citizens, municipalities, and SMEs to create local renewable energy projects. So think of it very simply. If all of us here put 1,000 euros each and we created a collective solar panel, We installed it outside of Athens, and we produced our own energy, and that's reducing our energy bills. That's the very, let's say, high-level description of an energy community. So in that sense, I think my line of work has a lot of this idea of sovereignty, but like energy sovereignty. And we talk quite a lot about what forms of energy are actually useful and what is like superfluous energy. Like heating your pool is superfluous, it's luxurious. Heating your food is necessary. So I think it's really that kind of distinction that I think Plixaro was it you that talked about how do you legitimize how do you democratize and legitimize like what we consume in the digital world, and I'm going to add in the energy world as well. And I think energy communities are the right scale to do that, to start these discussions. And I'm such a boomer when it comes to the digital world. So I'm very happy because I think Harry will interrogate us a bit in the second part on how do we do socially useful data centers. Yeah. And maybe just to really take one more minute to say that at least technologically speaking, there are some solutions to green them. And we see that in the world of energy communities as well. Like for example, in Denmark, there's a really big energy community that is partnering up with a data center. It's using the excess heat to power a local district heating network sustainably. And it's powering the data center through a solar plus storage park. So it's kind of like a circular idea that is also owned by the local community. So you have kind of both the technological and the social aspect there. I think AI and data centers can be super useful in forecasting of our energy consumption. Sorry, now I'm getting a bit technical from the energy side, but basically our energy systems are becoming much more stochastic, right? So we used to have fossil fuels, you burn them whenever you want, you have energy all the time, you open the light, you don't care. Whereas now we're moving to an energy system that is based on the sun and the wind that are not available all the time, right? So we need to be a bit more flexible in how we consume energy. Like we have to optimize our consumption. Like it makes more sense to charge your electric car or put on the air condition or, I don't know, put on your washing machine in the day because there's a lot of sun and there's a lot of solar panels. And I think, AI and data centers that's kind of like a socially useful form of kind of using technology and like this digital sovereignty. I think I will leave it at that. And I think I'd be keen to really openly explore with the audience as well. How is there a socially useful data center really?
No, I think this is also the goal of the panel, sort of to foreground this more hidden tensions and then explore them and then have that kind of discussion. Please, Lydia, you have the floor.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Manuilide. I'm a journalist working with the independent newsroom Solomon here in Greece, and I'll be talking to you about one specific part of my work that connects very much to the broader themes we've been talking about, both Greece's digital transformation and plan and this data center push. So a lot of my work focuses on AI and automated tech used within the migration control context. And one of the things that I've been looking at the past couple of years are the technologies that are used within refugee camps in Greece. And these are camps that have opened in the last few years, since 2021. They're funded by the EU and they're highly securitized. So in them we see things like biometric systems that are used for entry and exit, automated threat detection systems, and then there are other practices that I've been following, like data extraction from refugees' phones and so on. I think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, we're talking about already vulnerable, marginalized, racialized communities of people who are being subjected to these technologies, and we're talking about a dynamic where these tools and these practices are essentially piloted on this population before they are kind of rolled out on a wider basis, especially as you know, various areas of governance become more data-driven in Greece and elsewhere. So one of the things I have been looking at as well is who profits from these ventures. There are certainly several Greek companies that are involved in these projects. Notably, there are a couple, at least 2 Israeli companies that are part of this surveillance ecosystem in the camps. At least one of them has defense contracts in Israel. And of course, this brings up many ethical questions about tech that we know is experimented on Palestinians under occupation, and then again rolled out on a wider basis. And I think my colleagues touched on the kind of lack of foresight that we see with, especially with the data center expansion in Greece, and already economically strained and environmentally strained communities having to receive these data centers. And I see echoes of that in what we see in the camps. One example is on Samos Island, which is one of the first camps that opened. It's now become this kind of flagship EU-funded camp where whenever there's an official visiting, the Greek officials will take them through this camp and give them a tour. And this very same camp hasn't had running water since it opened in 2021. So it has this, pretty sophisticated surveillance apparatus, no running water, not because of the tech system itself, but I think because of some of the lack of foresight that we've been talking about. So I think one last thing I want to add is that with these projects, as with the broader themes that we've talked about, we see the Greek government employing this kind of move fast and break things, Silicon Valley mentality, where with these projects in particular, there were processes that needed to be followed before these systems were implemented, like data protection impact assessments, fundamental rights impact assessments, which the Greek migration ministry completely ignored, and actually it ended up being fined over this by the Greek data protection authority. So there's a larger pattern, I think, of these legal safeguards being afterthoughts. I will stop there. I think that gives a good overview of what I'll be talking about, and pass it to you guys.
Yes.
To try to keep it interactive, we now have questions.
Yeah. So the next part is
Focusing on the local experts.
Yeah, we're focusing on the local experts, sort of putting the spotlight on them and asking them a few questions. And after that, turn to you.
So my questions are for Theodora. Yes. And it's one of the points that I also mentioned in my presentation that make the debate sometimes more difficult is, okay, within this panel talk, we kind of forefront the material dimension of technology and discussions around technology. In your research, you emphasize the importance of subsea cables, but you have also done research on perhaps why it is so that these discussions remain invisible and how the imaginaries that we use often tend to be immaterial, like the cloud. And I wonder whether you could expand also a bit about these political implications of these choices in language. And if there is still time, I have a second question, because you've also had positioned quite well the attractive nature of Greece geographically for current developments. And you have already hinted at some of the geopolitical implications that are attached to this position. Whether you could also then maybe expand a bit upon the position Greece itself and its government takes vis-a-vis this attractive position and in the broader geopolitical landscape.
Okay. Okay, 2 questions. So, how much time do
You can take it.
Yeah, I'll let you know. It's fine.
Okay.
Even though we started also a bit later, we might take a little bit more time. So.
Provided that you're still energized. If not, I will have Christian energize you again.
I have more ideas.
Okay, the thing is about the immateriality of the cloud and all this discussion surrounding it. I think that it is a concept that is tricky. And there is a certain political and economic use of this imagination that everything is digital, it's non-material, and it is ecological in a way. It's better to use our email than to print, and all these things that we've been brainwashed the previous years. And the thing is that this was my angle that I arrived to the sea cables, because I realized that it is one additional veil. The sea works for the subsea infrastructures, works as an additional veil. So recently the literature has arrived to this political use of immateriality, and certain scholars realized that it is being used in order to avoid regulation, in order to avoid the reaction of local communities, in order to avoid the sabotage. All of them tend to be hidden. I mean, if you try to search the data centers that there are here in Athens, there are in the area of Koropi, and the spot on the map is the whole Koropi. There is no other way to find them. So I believe that there is a certain political and economic use to this idea of immateriality, and that benefits only big corporations, because they being left free to work and to expand with the only criteria of their profits and nothing else. So for me it is interesting to change the angle and starting talking about the materiality of the cloud, because the line of thought leads in that way much more nearest to environmental preservation and social equality and human rights. So the second one was about the geopolitical implications. Okay, I think that generally data centers, when they become a hotspot, and when a country invests in data centers and starting to have a big infrastructure, this is proposed as an up level at the country's, as an upgrade to the country's importance. And also they combine that with security, that if we are important in terms of infrastructures, okay, I believe that there is a certain point up to one point you are important as a country because you have several infrastructures, like you see now the B-52 that started from US, they got more petrol over Crete. It's the Suda base that has been used in order for them to continue their mission. So I mean that up to a certain point you are important and you have several infrastructures, and that makes you, guarantees you peace. But up to one level of escalation in geopolitical menace, then you have the opposite result, and I think that this is something that we have to think about. And the last point that I referred before, that we have a certain concentration of different infrastructures in the East Mediterranean at this point. And for me, this is tricky. There is not really big discussion, open discussion in the public sphere about the implication that this concentration has. What I'm doing now?
No, you couldn't rest. No, thank you very much for the answer. I think it was very elucidating, and I believe
I can, then we can come back to it. Okay, I have. I don't know where Harris went, but I hope it's all good. And I have two questions for Lydia. So I think a theme we see a lot is securitization throughout this whole discussion. Could you go a little bit more into detail in how this comes together with this digital transformation of Greece? Do we see these narratives like reinforcing each other, being a securitization of borders a common goal of Greece and the EU? And how does that link also with the expansion of data centers, not from the Microsoft perspective or even with the perspective of big tech? And my second question would be, based on your experience as a journalist working and reporting on Greek digital media policies, could you discuss any challenges that you might be facing, voicing critical perspectives in the Greek media landscape in light of the situation of the freedom of expression in Greece.
So to your first question, broadly, I think securitization provides the political justification, and then the digital transformation, the plans that we see Greece publicizing, provides the digital infrastructure, and then you have the foreign involvement or capital driving that, creating the creating the thing that will in whatever case. So let me be specific. In the example that I gave about migration control and refugee camps, as I said, we see some of these technologies essentially being tested on people on the move, and what you have is refugee camps essentially turning into laboratories for things like behavioral analytics, biometric systems, and so on. Another way this connects to the larger picture is that when you have more data that needs to be obviously processed, stored, and analyzed, you need the infrastructure to do that. And it's not just within migration, but I think within Greece we see governance in general becoming more data-driven, and so that creates a need for the larger infrastructure. On the second question about being a journalist in this space, I think most people in this room know that Greece doesn't do so hot on the press freedom front. We have consistently ranked last for the last 4 years on press freedom rankings, on RSF's press freedom ranking. And I think in particular covering surveillance and covering migration is tricky, and there are certain obstacles that come with that. So one of the issues, of course, that I think you all face in your own roles is the very limited access to information, whether it's through freedom of information requests or other ways. We often hit roadblocks because officials tell us there are public security concerns or IP concerns or commercial interest concerns, especially because these involve, the contracts involve private companies. The other tricky thing that I've been navigating here in Greece in particular, because I also have a background in the US and working as a journalist there, I'm Greek-American, is the techno-optimist or techno-solutionist narrative that is so prominent here. And it reminds me sort of the narrative that I would hear in the US like 20 years ago with, Facebook connecting the world and all tech is good, and if you think that's not the case, you're backwards and you're anti-progress, you're alarmist, whatever. So that is it's a weird thing to come up against, and I think of course it influences the larger media narrative. Any coverage that you see about border tech on Greek TV, for example, is always like, wow, look at these systems that catch migrants. And, as independent journalists, we try to do better stories and better investigations than what we see in the general media. But, of course, there's only so much we can do with the limited resources that we have. So, yeah, we're operating in a tricky climate, but I think, I think all of you are as well.
Yes, thank you so much. And we also, sorry if there's some background noise, but we just thought it would be better to open up, to freshen up a bit the oxygen levels of the room. So I'll just conclude with another set of final questions to Christos. He already spoiled a bit. So I was just thinking that, how can Greece, or really any member state, sort of reconcile the ambition of the twin transition, green transition and digital transformation, against the background of the industrialization of AI, while of course the greening part is sort of fading in the background, and by extension, or extrapolating from that, can we imagine a world where Plexavra sort of already hinted at degrowth or descale, but have smaller, infrastructures, like smaller data centers, or data centers that are oriented to serve the local communities that have true reciprocal benefits? What are your thoughts?
So, both to dodge the second question, but also because I'm genuinely interested, I will really open it up to the audience as kind of like the first prompt.
Experts also in the room.
Yeah, exactly. I think they have much more better answers than me. But in the first part, I want to make a super quick tangent before answering the question. You mentioned, Harry, that the green transition is fading in the back. It's not, like, it's really, we're seeing finally that renewables are starting to displace fossil fuels. It's like we're undergoing a historical shift, especially because of solar, and especially because of China. But the AI boom and the data center boom in countries like Indonesia, or like the big coal producers of Asia, or like Vietnam, that are kind of like the bulk of emissions currently globally. They were about to start decarbonizing as well, but because they're building all these data centers, they're suddenly keeping the coal plants open or building more gas plants. So I think it's a historical moment that we need to consider. Also in the context of countries like the Netherlands, like the United States, coming out and saying we're cutting aid that was meant to go to these countries so that they can transition to clean energy. So I think we have to think of these global repercussions of the transition. I'll just conclude with a very concrete part of reconciling the digital with, and I guess it also answers a bit the second question. There's a big report that just came out by Climate Action Network. It's the biggest network of environmental NGOs in Europe. It's called Fair Benefit Sharing, and it's about presenting for the first time a set of 14 KPIs and a methodology for how developers of renewable energy projects, a private developer, let's say Iberdrola, whatever, a private company, can go into a local community and measure how much it's co-developing the project with the local community. Let's say a wind park, by offering shares, by doing awareness raising, by hiring a mediator to work with the local community. So it's really interesting. So this was developed for renewable energy projects. But now, as Electra, we're trying to take that methodology and apply to data centers. Because it's more or less the same thing, right? You're creating a shared infrastructure of strategic importance. How can you work with the local community to, kind of take their opinions on board? Locate it carefully to not affect biodiversity. Create a community fund from the proceeds of the data center and reinvest back into the local community. So I think, for me, that's as far as we've gotten to being tangible to answer your question, like how do we make it socially beneficial? I'm happy to share the report after.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for keeping up with a very packed and dense panel, and for surviving through the day. Now it's your time to grill or to ask questions to the panel and our local experts. So please raise your hand, and I guess we have a mic, or do we just? Yeah. Okay. So in the front, please, here.
Μπορείτε να σηκωθείτε όμως, παιδί, να φαίνεται.
You have to stand up.
Αυτό.
Yes, I'm here, cool.
Okay.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions. This is really great. One for Theodora and one for Christos. Greece has, compared to many other European countries at least, a lot of islands. And in terms of connectivity to these islands, economically, there's often a drive to use, first wireless and now maybe satellite technology for connectivity. Maybe you could comment a little bit on the kind of geographic nature of Greece in relation to connectivity and how islands play into this, obviously in the context of Starlink and things like this, which are obviously on people's minds. And for Christos, it's really amazing to hear the work you're doing with community energy cooperatives. Data centers are often now saying, we're going to both build the data center and then also we're going to build a whole energy infrastructure and tie it. Do you worry sometimes that by doing the community projects, you're creating a norm and the legal infrastructure that also allows private actors like that to kind of go off-grid in a way, or feed into the grid in order to justify things without having to engage in more public discussions in a kind of collective way across society? Thanks.
Great. So Dora, you want to...
Okay, I have to admit that the next thing that I want to study is the smart islands, which is a project that big corporations have for Greek islands. But up to now, there are not enough stuff that I can say. The thing that I have understood is that there is a problem with the fishery. Because in the Aegean Sea, it is very different than when we talk about the big cables that goes through Peloponnesus and then Crete, and then they arrive to Suez. There you have a big dip. In the archipelago, it is different, so you don't really have this concentration of cables. But about smart islands, I think that at some point I will be more productive.
Can I quickly intervene and just
Of
say,
course
because
you
you
can.
mentioned smart islands,
Yeah.
and I don't know how many you're familiar with this, but Amazon AWS in 2020 actually announced that it would create the first smart island in Greece. That would be the smart island of Naxos. And it would, they said things like we will smarten, whatever that means, the marina, the vessel, the ship traffic, the marine traffic, whatever. They will transfer blood samples using drones, unimaginable things. Of course, it didn't fly, but that didn't stop both the AWS and the local authorities to celebrate this, to keep going for 2 years. Now it's a bit buried, but it's still somewhere. Read up on it. It's actually very interesting.
I knew about Halki or Estipala. I didn't know about.
AWS Smart Island Access. Look it up.
Okay. So just to understand your question, you mean if the community, like the methodology I just outlined, if it kind of whitewashes or legitimizes the data center companies, is that the question? Probably. I mean, that's why we haven't done it yet, first of all. We're trying it now through an Horizon project, so it's still kind of at the research stage. But I really just throw the question back at you, like how can we really make can data centers be socially useful? Like in what dumb technology, smart technology, where do you put them in the spectrum? So sorry to not be more specific, but sorry, very quickly, we have the same problematization with the renewable companies, that if you actually work with them, it's like kind of the in the system, outside of the system dilemma. Like, do you legitimize them, but it's still good? So it's
another question in that, so if you can just start that. I have already passed on.
No, we came back.
So I'll stand here and then I'll just ask the question. Thank you so much for this panel. I really enjoy it. It's like very provoking, and I'm very glad that in fact we are like having this kind of discussions, because sometimes I miss like in some paper, presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your work also.
Thank you. So I have 4 questions. I'll try to be, it's because I'm very interested in like what would be like, sustainability in data centers and social benefits. That's more common. I've been in Mexico doing fieldwork. Data centers promise things to the community and then it never happens. So my sentence is that the most sustainable data center is that data center that is never built. That's a comment. First question is about the life cycle of subsea cables. Do you know what happened to these subsea cables when at the end of their life cycle? So that's first question. Second question is about Microsoft data center in Greece. Do they have preference contracts? Because that's happening in Spain, that they provide, they say, in the case of Draw, we're going to provide you, water. So they have, this kind of contracts that also hospitals have. Third question is about Mediterranean solidarity. Spain and Greece, we suffer a lot during the financial crisis. Why we are not building Mediterranean solidarity, given digital sovereignty that comes from Northern European countries?
Yes. So what do you want to do first? With the life cycle of subsea cables.
Yes. I will refer to Nicole Staroslewski, if I pronounce it correctly. Zilski. She has studied exactly that and the impact about the communities and what happened for the communities after they abandon all the infrastructures that they have constructed. So already there is also a site with her name, and there are maps and all the interviews and the materials she has collected. So I propose you, if you are more interested, to take it. It is very interesting. And was another question? No? So the past.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I mean, the short answer is that there is no specifically from what I found so far, there's like no specific preference contracts, but what I have identified, and we have also Yorgos in the room who has also done work in that. So in that sense, if you want to contribute, please feel free to facilitate the investment of Microsoft, specifically the construction of data centers. So this will be built in like semi-remote locations near the airport, as I said, and this would be hard to reach locations, right? So they had to build actual roads, they had to expand the actual grid or improve the actual grid so that the the energy, especially the renewable energy that will have at some point to flow through and fuel the data centers, will be able to sustain that kind of specific energy. So in that sense, we do see, what we identified at least in our study, is that whatever reciprocal benefits, as in improving infrastructures, was like how do you call it? Like a side benefit, right? A side effect, and that was primarily to serve the interests, of course, of Microsoft. So in that sense, I wouldn't call it necessarily a contract preference, but a preference, which I think in the case of energy, there might be at some point some contract preferences with the energy supplier. Although, and with that I will conclude, currently the public, how do you call it? The public power corporation. The public power corporation of Greece is entering also the race for data centers. So and it's one of the largest power suppliers, so there might be also competition now with this kind of investments. So we'll see. And the Mediterranean solidarity, if I may say something, there used to be this like a meeting of Southern European Mediterranean countries, like how do you call it? Like if a few years back, was often convened. In 2018, I think 2019, Greece, Italy, Spain were leading the discussion. Somehow that, especially under Syriza government, I think, but now that has sort of faded in the back. Which, now the forces are elsewhere.
Yeah, and if I may add, I think this is the issue with sovereignty. When you're talking about sovereignty, ultimately it is about competitiveness, it is about bringing into contradiction with each other, about winning the race, rather than solidarity. You don't see that discussion. So I love the idea. I might, if you allow me, introduce it as an alternative in my research and hope to see more. Do you guys want to add something?
No, just semi-related, but because it featured quite a lot in our discussion. Did you see that Sanchez got Spain to be exempted from the 5% NATO target? Yes. I think that's where I would like to see more solidarity in this anti-war movement.
Any other questions, please?
Yeah. Can you come actually here in the front, because we are asked to speak in the microphone here. So if you like also, Sassian, you can wait around here.
Facing which way?
That's
so my question is kind of building on Anna's and some of the conversations. So obviously lots of you have described how the sea around Greece is highly securitized, whether that's from Frontex, other kind of anti-migrant pushbacks, etc. So I wondered, I'm not too familiar with any pushes against that securitization from kind of activists, obviously by civil society, but kind of whether there's pushes to kind of desecuritize the seas around Greece, and whether things like subsea cables would become part of that. Because obviously there's, and you can see this research coming out of Ireland, of like there's an extent to which the threat to subsea cables is being artificially inflated in order to feed into this requirement for bigger defence budgets. Most damage to subsea cables comes from anchors and comes from erosion rather than actual kind of sabotage. So yes, that's my question 1.5.
I can start with so I can answer the first part about the pushes against the securitization, and definitely there's a big push from NGOs, from civil society. So some examples that come to mind are BVMN, the Border Violence Monitoring Network, IHR, I Have Rights, which is this organization on Samos Island that does a lot of work documenting the tech being used in the camp specifically and the impact it has on people. And then I think one of the primary actors working in this area more broadly is Homo Digitalis. It's a civil society organization, and they have lawyers who have filed complaints to the Hellenic Data Protection Authority that have actually led to fines. I don't know how this connects to the undersea cable discussion, so I'll pass it on, but there's definitely a push against the securitization.
Laura, you want to add something to it? Like the artificially inflated threats, and securitization of the sea as a way to...
Okay, okay. Generally speaking, the seabed becomes more and more important in terms of geopolitical strategical target. Generally, the sea becomes more important. If you have a conflict during our days, it is much more possible that you will have it in the sea. This is the reason that you have all this conflict between US and China in the north, in the south East Sea. But the thing is that when you have a conflict in the sea, it is not possible to arrive fast there. So what tends to happen is that is the sabotage, and the sabotage goes mainly to the subsea cables, and this is a reason that it is important in that terms. But in the archipelago, in the Aegean archipelago, we are not talking about this use. It is such a small sea that you don't even have this kind of huge infrastructures. It is much more less, and there are mainly the fiber cables, which doesn't have so big electromagnetic concentration. So I cannot see the connection between the immigrant threat and the subsea infrastructures. Of course, it has to do with several other infrastructures that are not under sea.
Please.
Should I use the mic?
I don't know how to use it.
Shall
I press it?
No,
just. Okay. Thank you so much for holding this session. Actually, I wasn't that informed about the data infrastructures in Greece, and I learned so many things. And I really like the connection of data infrastructures with power infrastructures in Greece. And as you mentioned, the smart islands, I was wondering whether there is any connection with the installation of wind turbines in the mountains, because there are many citizens initiatives like Save Agrafa and Save Vermio about it. So I was wondering if data infrastructures are using this power that is coming from wind turbines, because like they have a severe environmental impact in the local communities and in general. So I was wondering like if there is any link and how we can tackle it. Thank you.
To the extent that I know, there is no direct co-location right now, because also the data centers are currently being built in Greece. So there's not yet any co-location of, let's say, a wind turbine and a data center. So I don't think there's for now a connection. I think though, if we keep building these data centers and we keep increasing our energy needs, we're gonna need more energy, hopefully not from fossil fuels. So it might increase the need for wind, for all sorts of renewable energy. But I think, and this doesn't apply to data centers, it applies to every case. You don't have to go and put the wind turbines on the virgin mountaintops. You can put them next to highways, to ex-coal mines, ex-landfills, places that have already been burdened. And I think that's also the community aspect of like actually co-developing the project to ensure that it has minimal impact on the environment. Yeah. I'm very much in favor of wind energy, just not in that context. Yeah.
Can I add something? I will tell you what I know, and Christos maybe, of course, knows more about that. But the thing that I know is that since for the big players, for the big tech, in order to arrive to a certain country, they demand from the country to invest in solar energy and in wind power. So the reason is that because they have so many reactions from different countries, due to the fact that they are very energy demanding, so they said, okay, we will consume just alternative resources of power. Taking into account that, we can assume that the same happened also for Greece. And before some days, I've seen in the national broadcast, it was the director of one of the biggest companies that are building actually the data centers, and when the journalist asking him if it is a problem because they are really energy demanding and they will consume all the power that we have from alternative resources like sun and wind, the answer he gave is, don't worry, in terms of alternative resources, we have covered as a country our needs. We are fully covered. The rest of it can go for data centers and all the rest, and there will be no problem. So another example that I can give, but it is before some days, I get a call from a person from Volos. It is a place in a periphery of Greece. And there they have agricultural land, and it is fully covered for solar panels. And when they search if there is a connection between the solar panels, huge, and the data center that exists there, they found out that it is producing much more energy that the data center need, and that this energy goes to
Stock market.
So the stock market, in order to exchange with the consume of. Okay, so what I understand is that there is something like no plan for the country. Of course, Amazon bought at the end, after the investment, they bought all the solars and they use it in the stock market. So there is no plan in terms of what the energy needs of a country are, and so you make a plan and arrange where you will place the alternative resources. It is a total mess.
And on that note, we will take one last question before wrapping up. Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you. Let's take it from the top. Lawrence, do you want to give it a go, or do you?
No, I mean, I can give some general thoughts on. I tend to agree with this idea of collectivizing resources, even though privately owned, perform a public function. I'd say that unfortunately the current policy debate, also within the EU, doesn't necessarily, at least to my knowledge, enter into those type of spaces, and every type of negotiation space that might be built tends to favor those currently in power, be it big tech or their position a type of actor like those who hold general purpose models, that is not of course the energy grid, as then the party which we will negotiate with, and then civil society is also considered as some kind of homogeneous block, which brings into the fold also additional difficulties, because civil society as such is also not homogeneous. It also has a variety and diversity of needs, and that might also drown certain voices in the debate. So these are things that might make it more difficult, in the sense that the law would, I would say, like, my intuition is that the law plays a legitimizing force against having more collective-led initiatives, and that stem from the citizen and grassroots movements.
Something small that I have seen several ideas from different parts of the world that were using the the data centers, small data centers, in order to heaten the swimming pools that are free for everybody, or to provide free electricity for the people, or to have libraries that are hidden by the data center that is underneath, and having parks. But I am sure that for whatever good idea, the scaling is presupposition. I mean, it's not possible to continue talking about all this expanded. We have to scale.
Okay, I will also give it a very very short answer. So the first thing is that indeed we typically tend to have infrastructures that privatize benefits and socialize the costs. So we have to reverse that. And the problem is that when you present, especially like as a top-down sort of way, in a top-down way, when you present something as a given, then you don't necessarily have, a choice, right? Like as a citizen, as a person living next to a data center, you've been deprived of the capacity as a citizen to exercise your rights, to be involved in, the deliberations and whatnot. So I think that it's key, of course, to think of always, as you said, have in mind the energy grids, the water grids. How do we protect this as public utilities, public-owned utilities that should always not work in favor of profit-making, but for societal benefit? And on top of that, because we also had a similar craft previously led by Georgia Georgia Panayotidou, thank you. Where, among others, transparency requirements were discussed. So you have to have some governance mechanisms like transparency requirements and whatnot that must actually then be able to be acted upon. So you have to have strong civil society, you have to have strong, maybe also non-profit investigative journalism, being able to make use of those resources to hold account these, those who are taking the decisions. And that would be my concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add. I could say that perhaps in the European policy discourse, we do hear a little bit about this public digital infrastructures, but so almost gimmicky in a completely idealistic bubble world like the Eurostack. So I have little faith for the moment in this, but more initiatives are trying to develop strategies as the previous craft that Haris mentioned, as this craft, and ways to think about it.
I think there's three layers. I think we're using data too gratuitously. Like I'm playing I'm playing board games with my friends and they open ChatGPT to ask the rules. Like, let's stop individually, like guys, go declutter your emails. You have 2,000 unread emails, I'm sure. So I think there is the individual part. I think there's the network and solidarity part of like, can we learn about new platforms, new tools that are not as extractive? Because I'm sure, I think DeepSeek, the Chinese AI, I think is less, I don't know. Yeah, you guys know better than me, but to learn and to share these alternative platforms that are less extractive. And then there's the government part, which for me it's a big black box still. Like I don't know what should be the regulation to socialize. I think Lawrence, you kind of alluded to that a bit about collectivization, but I can't yet conceive what that means. So, yeah.
Yeah, very, very briefly, as you noted, I think investigative journalism has a big role to play in uncovering all of this and all of the questions. And I think there is a lot more of it focusing on data centers. There are places like the AI Pulitzer Center Fellowship, which is investing a lot of money into these stories being covered. So I know me and my colleagues at Solomon have applied to several grants to cover some of these very things we discussed. And hopefully we'll be able to get into it more deeply.
And on that note, we would like to thank you all. Thank you again, Dora, for facilitating. Thank you to Aina for hosting us. Thank you to FAC for allowing us to have this craft session. And thank you all for withstanding the oxygen deprivation and the fatigue. And again, thank you so much.